Today, I want to give a nonviolent perspective on self-defense because I think this is on the minds of many people who are invited to think about becoming nonviolent. Uh, Many people believe that nonviolence just means doing nothing, even in the face of threats of violence. But nonviolent leaders like Gandhi and King accepted the need for action, even violent action, when it was necessary. And their idea of when it was necessary was at a much higher threshold than most of us have. But they knew that nonviolent skills offered a range of things that you might be able to do before you have to use violence. Gandhi was against cowardly passivity. He hated people being passive much more than he hated people being violent. Um, at least violent responses are active, and he believed in active responses to things that are wrong and to injustice. There's a famous example that he gave of a madman running riot through a village. And he posed the question, now, what do you do? This person is a danger to people in the village. He's destroying homes. He is threatening to kill people. What do you do? And he said, you may have to kill him. You may have to stop him using physical force and violence, even to the point of taking his life. So that was an extreme situation. And he said, you know, we want to avoid violence, and we want to use nonviolence in a strategic way because it can solve many problems. But when a madman is running through your village, you don't really have a nonviolent option, or you may be pushed to that point, and you may have to use violence. Martin Luther King used the example of getting attacked, mugged in an alley, kind of an urban American example, although that kind of thing happens all over the world, of course. But for Dr. King, you know, he would say, of course, you defend yourself and you use violence if necessary. That may not be the time to demonstrate how nonviolent you are. To save your life, you may have to be violent yourself. There is a point that sort of lies behind that, and that is that you need to be able to use violence. That means you need to be strong. You may need to know how to fight, and then choose not to do so in most situations. When kids see a big, strong guy, a leader of a nonviolence workshop who's obviously capable of beating them up or hurting them if necessary, but teaching them nonviolence, that's a very powerful example. And kids are hungry for nonviolent problem solving, for ways of being the hero, but without killing somebody, or by being clever enough to solve a problem using other means. That is really attention grabbing. And the addiction to violent entertainment bothers me a lot because it feels like the people who make those movies and video games and so on are trying to get kids addicted to their own adrenaline. Not paying attention to the fact that those media are are media for education as well, and inevitably so. They are teaching values. They are teaching lessons about cause and effect. They are teaching ways of behaving and offering examples of how they might behave. But very seldom is this message that a strong person is a person who is strong and smart and able to solve problems by figuring out what to do, short of violence. Too often, the narratives that we see in our media encourage violent self-defense. The first half of a movie makes us really angry at the villain because the villain is such an awful, creepy person. And then in the last part of the movie, the good guys get revenge the on the bad guy by beating him up or killing him or something like that. And that reinforces a number of messages that are just really unfortunate. It reinforces the idea that revenge equals justice, and justice equals revenge. And it reinforces this idea that the only way to defend yourself is through violence. Now, I have this mixed message, and I hope it's not too complicated, but the message is, yes, there are times when we are pushed to violence and sort of forced into it. But most of the time, and in a lot of the times that are modeled for us in our media, there are nonviolent alternatives that we could be using to defend ourselves and to solve other problems that are not being taught to us, that are not being shown. So that's a change that needs to be made. People have a deep-seated need, it seems, to reserve the right to be violent to themselves, even if they want everybody else to be nonviolent. It's a strange kind of disconnect. In fact, I venture to say that most people in the world want everybody else to be nonviolent. But partly because of fantasies of threat and of need for self-defense, we'd like to reserve that right to be violent to ourselves. And I think that's something that nonviolence education has to work on and learn to do better, because it's a true need that all of us have to straighten out that thinking. So in a nonviolence workshop or lesson or in a course, we don't start out with reassurance. We don't start out by reassuring people that, yes, they have that right to be violent. Because often, if they get that reassurance, they'll just shut down and they won't listen to anything else. But in workshops, we try to build some skills and some new ways of thinking first, and getting people to feel more capable, that they can solve problems using a different approach. And then we'll talk about the fact that, yeah, I mean, nobody can take the right of violence away from you. Who can do that? A teacher can't do that. You do have that right to be violent, and nobody can really take it away or change that. But we want to change the choices that people make about whether to deploy that skill or perhaps more creative skills. Let me give you a couple of examples. In our book, Ira Zepp and I have a chapter called Making Nonviolence Real. And by real, I mean two things. One is evidence-based nonviolence. We talk a little bit about the research in the social sciences that really supports a nonviolent approach. living and to problem solving. And then reality also means the application of nonviolence in professions that use force, like police, military, corrections people. And uh, after discussing many problems and cases, we come to this vision of um, violence and the use of violence in terms of thresholds. We talk about raising the threshold for the use of violence. In Another word for that is, where is the last resort before you use violence? Well, the last resort can be through education raised. Our knowledge of nonviolent things that we can do, nonviolent skills that we can use, can be used to push that threshold for violence higher. And that's, of course, I'm recommending my own book, but the book is called Nonviolence, Origins and Outcomes. And it's co-authored by me and by my late dear friend, Ira Zepp. There's a story about Bernard Lafayette, who got mugged one night by somebody. It didn't turn into a violent altercation, but the person had a weapon and they threatened Bernard and asked for his money. And Bernard's response was the following. He said, I don't have very much money, but I'll give you half. I need half of the money to buy some milk because my family needs some milk tonight. So if you'll come with me to the store, I'll buy my milk, and then you can have the rest of my money. And how about that for using words instead of deeds and instead of impulsive responding to address a problem? Another story that I use frequently is the story of Jim Lawson and the motorcycle gang. During the Nashville sit-ins, a group of student demonstrators were on their way to the lunch counters to sit in. This was on a day called Big Saturday, when a lot of things happened. But they were marching in a line, and they passed a motorcycle gang. And the motorcycle gang started to attack the people at the end of the line. One of the people was Bernard Lafayette, and the other was a kid named Solomon Gort. And they really started beating on Solomon Gort. And Bernard, using one of the skills that he had learned in Jim Lawson's workshops, he threw his body over Solomon Gort to take some of the blows, so that one person wasn't just absorbing all of this violence. And at about the same time, Jim Lawson himself, the teacher, the legendary nonviolence trainer in the Nashville sit-in group, he walked up and approached the leader of the motorcycle gang. And he said, I see that you have a motorcycle. I have a motorcycle too. And they started talking about motorcycles and things they had done to customize them and to make them more powerful machines. And as this conversation proceeded, the other members of the motorcycle gang gathered around to listen. And by the way, the beating stopped. The violence toward the students stopped. So the conversation continued for a little further, and then Jim eventually said, really nice talking to you, got to go now. And he got through a threatening, violent encounter and possibly saved the lives of his students, Gort and Lafayette, by transforming the situation, by breaking the script and defending them by doing something else and sending the situation off in a different direction. That's a form of self-defense too, collective self-defense in that case. But it was a reflection of Jim Lawson's depth of understanding and the skills that he had built, following in the Gandhi tradition, that enabled him to do that. So there are nuances, there are complexities to self-defense. It's more than just this simple idea of turning the other cheek when you are struck. When you turn the other cheek, you're doing something unexpected. You're changing the script on the person who hit you. You're giving that person another chance to stop. And who knows, it might work. It might also work if you struck back at the person who struck you. But of course, that might not work either. That might result in you getting beaten or even killed. So there are lots of ways to think about this topic, and it is an important topic. It's not one that I'm ever going to try to avoid in either in an educational situation or hopefully in outside those situations. But it comes up as a fear all the time, this fear that nonviolence will make one vulnerable. And if we look at evidence, if we look at what's really going on behaviorally and cognitively, that's not true. If we look at it statistically, it's also not true. Studies comparing violent and nonviolent attempts to change governments, for example, show that nonviolent attempts are successful more often, and violent revolutions are successful only about 20 or 25% of the time. That is very important work. It was done by Erica Chenoweth and her colleagues, and it is part of the research base for understanding nonviolence and self-defense as being topics that are not opposed to each other. They can be melded together. I will talk about just war theory in the next video. That's a topic that relates to this one, of course, and I hope it helps to answer questions that come up all the time when people are beginning to learn about nonviolence. If you have found this interesting and informative, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel, and I hope you will give the video a like, because that helps. And I will be back very soon.